Sean Hannity has been on television for nearly 30 years. He has interviewed presidents, survived culture wars, outlasted competitors. He has been the loudest, most unmovable voice on one of the most watched cable news networks in American history. The man does not get caught off guard. So when he paused mid-sentence during a conversation that had nothing to do with politics, lowered his voice just slightly, and said, "I found someone who makes me better every single day," the room went quiet in a way that Sean Hannity rarely makes rooms go quiet. He didn't say his name. He didn't need to. Everybody watching already knew who he was talking about. And the reason it hit so hard had nothing to do with celebrity gossip or network drama or who is dating who headlines. It hit hard because of how long he had kept it hidden. Because of what it cost him to say it out loud. And because of the road, the very long, very hard, very specific road, that had to be walked before a man like Sean Hannity could sit in front of a camera and say something that honest. At 63 years old, the man who built a career on never showing weakness just showed you everything. Here's the story nobody has told completely. This part gets skipped in every profile of Sean Hannity. And it shouldn't. Because before Fox News, before the primetime slot, before the presidential interviews, Sean Hannity was nobody. And he knew it. And he kept going anyway. He was born in Queens in 1961, youngest of four in an Irish-American family that had no particular reason to think their kid would end up on national television. His father was a court officer. His mother worked as a corrections officer at a county jail. They lived in Franklin Square, Long Island, and the lessons of that household were discipline, faith, and the understanding that nothing gets handed to you. By his early teens, Hannity was already working. Dishwasher at 12, cook at 13, busboy then waiter then bartender, then construction, painting contractor, hanging wallpaper, framing houses. That's not a resume. That's a man trying to figure out what he's supposed to be. What saved him, or maybe redirected him, was talk radio. He'd listen all day while he worked. Voices through a speaker, arguing, persuading, challenging. Something about it got under his skin. The idea that you could shape how people think just by being compelling enough to keep them listening. He ended up in Santa Barbara, California, doing volunteer work at a college radio station. Unpaid, unpolished, unknown, but he showed up every single time. That's the version of Sean Hannity that gets forgotten when you're watching the primetime version. The kid from Queens who worked construction by day and practiced his voice at a college station for free. Talent mattered. But the willingness to show up when nobody was watching mattered more. And that trait, that stubborn, relentless refusal to quit, is going to show up again later in this story in a very different context. From Santa Barbara, he moved through radio markets in Alabama and Georgia. Smaller cities, bigger audiences, sharpening what he was doing until the right people were paying attention. By 1996, Fox News came calling. They were a brand new network. Ambitious, aggressive, and looking for voices that could hold their own in a fight. They paired Hannity with liberal commentator Alan Colmes for a show called Hannity and Colmes, and the chemistry was immediate. 2 worldviews, 1 table, every single night. The show became a hit. Not because one side always won, but because it felt real. Because Hannity didn't perform his convictions, he actually had them. When Hannity launched as a solo program, it became one of the most watched shows in cable news history. He interviewed presidents. He drove news cycles. He courted controversy and emerged from most of it intact. But here's what people who only know the television version miss entirely. Off camera, Sean Hannity is described by nearly everyone who knows him personally as quiet, private, surprisingly reserved. A man who values loyalty above almost everything else and who rarely lets people past a certain point. He spoke often about faith, about his parents' voices, about Sunday dinners growing up, and the kind of honesty that only comes from people with nothing to prove. The broadcaster that America watched every night was real. But so was the man underneath him, the one who still missed the simplicity of where he came from, and who had never quite figured out how to let his personal life be as public as his professional one. That tension, between the loudness of the career and the quietness of the man, is exactly what makes the next part of this story so worth understanding. Back in Huntsville, Alabama, during those early radio years before anyone outside of a regional market knew his name, Sean Hannity met Jill Rhodes. She was a journalist at a local newspaper. He would call her for story tips, professional at first, then personal, then something neither of them had quite planned on. They married in 1993. Simple ceremony. 2 people with ambition and energy and the particular kind of optimism you can only sustain in your early 30s when the future still feels entirely open. Their son Patrick was born in 1998. Their daughter Mary Kelly in 2001. Friends who knew Hannity during those years talk about a man who genuinely showed up as a father. At the tennis matches, at school events, present in a way that his schedule probably made harder than it looked. But television fame has a specific gravity to it. It pulls everything toward itself. The long hours, the constant scrutiny. The fact that your face is in millions of living rooms every night, which means you belong, in a strange way, to all of those people. And sometimes that leaves less of you for the ones at home. the marriage began to quietly fracture. In 2019, after 26 years together, Hannity and Jill separated. The divorce was finalized without a single bitter public statement. No tell-all interview. No tabloid war. Just two people who had shared a life choosing, with dignity, to go their separate ways. The silence around that ending said more than any statement could have. It showed respect. For each other, for their children, for the life they had built, even as they acknowledged it was over. What followed for Hannity was a period that people around him describe with one word: reflection. He didn't date publicly, didn't court attention, didn't fill the silence with noise, which for Sean Hannity was notable. He built a routine and held to it. Early mornings, workouts, prayer, then straight into work. His show kept performing. His audience stayed loyal, but something in him had recalibrated. He stopped mentioning relationships even in passing on air. He deflected any personal question with practiced ease. The message, if you were paying attention, was clear: this part of my life is not for public consumption. Colleagues noticed he'd become more thoughtful. The certainty was still there. That was never going anywhere. But the edges had softened. He laughed differently. He was slower to fill silences. He spoke about gratitude in a way that didn't sound performative. A man who had spent 3 decades in the loudest room in American media had learned, somewhere in the wreckage of a marriage ending, that not everything worth having can be managed like a broadcast schedule. And he had learned to be still with that. What he didn't know, or maybe what he was only beginning to realize, was that the next chapter of his story was already in the same building, walking the same hallways, working on the same floor. Someone who understood, from her own experience, exactly what he was carrying. Ainsley Earhardt is not a secondary character in this story. She has her own. A South Carolina native who built her career with discipline and warmth in equal measure. 14 years at Fox News, rising to become one of the most recognizable morning anchors the network has ever had. Behind the composed smile and the consistent positivity was a woman who had walked through 2 marriages that didn't last and was raising her daughter Hayden alone, leaning into her faith as the one thing that didn't shift under her. She launched Bible study segments that became genuinely popular, not because they were branded content, but because she believed every word. In many ways, her path and Hannity's ran parallel without intersecting. Both publicly guarded, both privately defined by faith and family, both learning what it meant to rebuild something real after loss. They had known each other professionally for years. But at some point, the professional conversation started going longer. The topics got more personal. The mutual respect deepened into something else. Neither of them confirmed it, neither denied it. They kept whatever was growing between them entirely out of the spotlight, which, given that they both work in a building where gossip is essentially a sport, required genuine discipline. Those who knew them both said the same thing when they were together: he's different, lighter, more like himself. I want to be honest about why this story is worth telling beyond the celebrity angle. Sean Hannity has spent 30 years being one of the most certain voices in America. Certain about politics, certain about values, certain about what's right and wrong. But the things he was most certain about in his personal life, his marriage, his family structure, the version of himself he'd built, those didn't hold the way his career did. And instead of performing his way through that, or turning it into content, or using the platform to rehabilitate his image, he just went quiet. He grieved privately. He rebuilt quietly. He let faith and routine carry him through the years when there wasn't much else to hold on to. And then, without a press strategy, without a publicist shaping the moment, he sat down and told the truth. At 63, in the middle of a career that wasn't slowing down. He admitted that the best thing in his life right now had nothing to do with television. That's not a political story. That's a human one. And sometimes those are the only ones worth telling. Drop a comment below. Did this change how you see him? Subscribe if you're new. See you next time.